And with us today is Dr. Ellen Lacter. She's been on before. She's a clinical psychologist who deals with a nasty secret that takes place in America, and those are the victims of ritual abuse. So, Ellen, I want to thank you for coming on, and how are you?
I'm doing just fine. How are you?
All right. Okay, glad to have you here. Huh?
You still
Am I
awake?
awake?
Yeah.
I haven't gone to sleep since last night when I talked to you with the, no, I'm only kidding. With those fireworks, my goodness, like I told you, I thought it was the Normandy invasion. At any rate, yeah, nightfall is definitely descended upon this part of the country. And, you know, we have a whole bunch of listeners that may have not been around when the last time you came on, or at least in the early days. And if you don't mind, would you share with folks what you're doing and why you identified this or it identified you as far as the particular field that you were going to concentrate on?
Okay, well, I've been a psychologist since 1986, and I've been working with victims of child abuse that whole time. And in the early 1990s, I got my first case of ritual abuse and slowly started trying to understand what that was all about, and talking to other psychologists and reading, and what I discovered was so horrible that that's basically become my life's purpose at this point, is to raise awareness of this, to help other therapists know that it's true, help survivors feel that somebody might believe them, help them go to therapists, get some help, and just raise support in the whole world, actually, for these survivors.
This is not a field that many, I think, would delve into. And again, there had to be something within you, some chord that it struck, and I'm not suggesting anything is in your childhood whatsoever, but not everybody's called to do such a thing. Do you know why it plucked your heartstrings, and also why you felt you were outfitted to go into a pretty grim realm of society?
Well, I know a lot of people like me who ended up having a case of this. You know, somebody come to them in their regular practice who started to remember these kinds of abuses, or had remembered it before they came into therapy, and started telling the therapist. And, you know, most therapists truly are not primarily financially motivated, but they genuinely go into the field because they want to help people. And when you hear about this level of horror, most therapists are very, very deeply affected, and people who are less afraid of repercussions against themselves very often tend to really stick with this. I know some therapists who have children who were afraid to really do this kind of work because they were afraid for the safety of their children. They were afraid that the abusers would harm their children, and I think that that's a valid concern. There also was the onslaught of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, mostly through the 1990s and probably into the early 2000s, where they really hit the press hard, claiming that these memories of ritual abuse and that dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation was claiming that therapists created that in their patients by looking for about it, et cetera. And so there were a lot of lawsuits against therapists. There was a lot of negative media attention, making therapists look foolish and even malevolent. And so I think a lot of therapists backed down out of fear. So I don't have children, so I wasn't as afraid. And I was experienced enough at the time to kind of know how to arm myself against possible lawsuit risk, and just really, I mean, mostly just when you hear these things, I mean, anybody hearing these things is profoundly affected. I've talked to people, you know, I tend to talk to everybody about this, so I'll talk to a grocery clerk about it. And people will tell me, oh, my God, I know that's true because I had a neighbor. I used to hear horrible screams coming from their garage. I would hear chanting. They had mattresses padding the walls of their garage, but I know something was going on. And, I mean, people are very, I think we're naturally pained by other people's pain unless we have some kind of fear reaction for some reason that causes us to not be willing to feel it. But I think our natural tendency as people is to empathize with other people, and you know, so I don't feel proud or anything. I just, in fact, I'm kind of disgusted by people who know about it and I feel have the strength to handle it and aren't willing to handle it.
Now, you are an East Coast person, and
originally.
Yes, and actually lived in the town next to mine in good old Hackensack, New Jersey.
Just for a year. I'm really a Long Island girl.
Yes, and I don't blame anybody for not wanting to admit or at least play down the fact that they did, in fact, live for a year in Hackensack, New Jersey.
I worked in
it was a nice name. It was a nice neighborhood. You had a park across the street, right?
Yeah, it wasn't bad.
Did you begin, though, to more or less concentrate on this particular field with the ritual abuse while you were in the East, or did this happen after you went to the West Coast? How did that all work out?
Well, on the East Coast, I was only an art therapist. I had only a master's degree back then. That was in the mid-'70s. Then I came to California and got my PhD, and it was after having the PhD for about 10 years that I first had my first case that I knew was ritual abuse. But now I look back on the cases that I had in the mental health clinic in Jersey City and look at the very odd symptoms of some of the people. It was a day treatment program that I was working in, and some of those people now I recognize as having dissociative disorders and probably very severe abuse, perhaps ritual abuse, but then we didn't really understand anywhere near as much about even just general abuse as we do now, and those people were misdiagnosed as schizophrenic or you know, manic depressive or whatever, and a lot of those people, I'm pretty clear, had severe abuse now. In fact, I can think back on some of the art that they drew, and I really regret not having picked up on the stuff that I would pick up on now. And that's true for most therapists who work with ritual abuse. We look back on cases we had before we understood ritual abuse and can pick out the people who we worked with years ago and think, oh my gosh, I think I missed it. It happens a lot.
I'm thinking this way, and so that's the way I'm going to frame this question. But you're going to tell me what the deal is. First of all, California to me, and of course the way it's been portrayed is first, you know, the land of fruits and nuts and taco huts, and also a place that seemed to have cults gravitate toward that state, whether it was the 49ers looking for gold or those who followed A.B. Simple McPherson. And I just look at California as being a state strange in the lower 48. Did California's environment and if there is an activity or a hyperactivity of ritual abuse, did that more or less draw you into doing this? And I may be all wrong about this, but I guess there's two things here. One, is there greater cult activity as far as you can see in the state of California? Is there something in California that you witnessed or was close to that made you go into working with victims of ritual abuse?
Okay. I really don't think that the kind of cult abuse that I'm working with is not more prevalent in California than on the East Coast or in the middle of the country. You know, I have my website, my endritualabuse.org website, and I have my email on there. And so I get many survivors from all over the world, actually, but mostly from this country and from Canada, contacting me, looking for help, telling me their stories, where they were abused. And, you know, there's plenty from the Northeast. There's plenty from, my gosh, Missouri seems to be a real troublesome spot.
Really?
Yeah, Michigan, Florida, yes.
Oh, yeah.
Pennsylvania seems pretty heavily represented. Indianapolis area for some reason. I mean, it seems to be a lot of places. Now, the kind of abuse that I worked with, that I work with, these are not victims of cults that are publicly known. These are very secret cults that don't have websites. They don't have names that anybody would recognize. They have roots going back in their families. So these people's parents were their main abusers. Their grandparents may have been their main abusers. It goes back many, many generations. So it's not like it's sprung up in California, you know, in the gold rush or in the 1960s with the, you know, counter-revolution or anything. This stuff has strong roots, actually going back primarily to Europe. So it's anywhere that people settled in this country who came over from Europe, you know, all around the country that they would be practicing this. So I don't think it's any more heavily represented in California.
It's interesting, but another time, or maybe we have some time later on, when you talk about Indianapolis or Indiana. Indianapolis is what you said, right?
Yes.
We've had guests on that talk about the rather strange history in Indiana and a certain kind of occultness built into even the laying out in what was called the magic squares of the land in Indiana. I know I'm being very vague, but that you would mention it. It's interesting that it would be one of the ones that pop up because we've gone through a number of shows with people who will actually, with one individual especially, who's talked about what's going on out there. So even though it's the heartland of America, it's still out there in the Midwest where everything's okay, and then in Kansas and all that. There's something out there that makes sense, and another time I'll elaborate on that a little bit if you don't mind. But for our purposes here, so it wasn't really the fact that you were in California that led you to do this. But what I want to do, and we have a couple of questions lined up for you, and of course, folks, if you want to call in to talk to Dr. Ellen Lacter, you can do that on the toll-free, which is 888-333-9009. And feel free to do so because this is a very, it's a very serious subject. Have you yourself, Doc, ever been involved in anything really heavy duty where it traces back? And I mean, I know you can't say a whole lot. You've kind of alluded to it in the past. But have you ever traced back some of this stuff? I mean, it is ritual abuse. It means it is persistent, it's repetitive. And have you ever traced it back to powerful figures?
Oh, well, oh my gosh. I will say that I've heard so many credible reports of a lot of Masonic, a lot of horrible abuse happening within Masonic lodges. And there are a lot of powerful people obviously connected to Masonic lodges that I do believe that a lot of ritual abuse happens within Masonic lodges. Now, I am not saying that all Masons by any means are practicing evil. I don't believe that. But in fact, I have actually no way of knowing how much the ritual abuse that happens in Masonic lodges is actually somehow part of the structure of Freemasonry versus how much it's people who are using that for their own proclivities, you know. So, but quite a few survivors that I find highly credible claim that their abusers were important Freemasons. Now, as far as political figures and people making claims about everything from U.S. presidents to, bloodlines, whether it's Rothschilds or the House of Windsor or all that. I'm going to plead the fifth.
I understand.
And I'll just say that if somebody that does not mean they're crazy. You should listen and evaluate, and it may be true, or it may not. But I would not immediately at all dismiss a person as paranoid or schizophrenic or anything if they made claims like that. So that's about all I can safely say.
No, I understand. I know you have to walk gingerly around this, and that's not because you don't have a heart for it. It's because of liability, let's face it. Even if you're right, sometimes you can't be right.
Well, there's liability, and then there's confidentiality. So some of the information that I get is from clients, and then some of the information I get is from survivors who I've met through my activism. And, so I have to be careful because I obviously can't say anything about anything any of my clients have told me.
That's true.
Whether I say their names or not, it still could put them at risk if I were to say anything. So I never say that. And and then people who aren't my clients, I have usually not had a chance to evaluate their credibility enough to and to work with them enough so that they can sort out which of their memories are true and which of their memories may have been the result of things that their abusers told them. So, for example, a lot of ritually abusive groups call themselves the Illuminati. A lot of different groups. We are the Illuminati, the most illuminated ones, the most powerful group in the world, and and you're going to have this very powerful position in our powerful group, and different groups have that same line, and then so the victims think that their abusers are the most powerful group, the Illuminati. Well, descended from Weishaupt or whoever in the 17th century,
right.
Well, obviously, most of those people have to not be descendants of the Illuminati because they're different groups, but yet they believe it. So in the process of therapy, all these, inflated, grandiose illusions that their abusers create, a lot of them get popped as people realize that the abusers were just self-aggrandizing and that it's not true. So, that's another reason why just if somebody says something, it could be true or it could be a lie, or somebody in a ritual could be, if you drug a victim and you put on a mask of a U.S. president and then that child believes that the U.S. president is now doing something to them, that's another source of misinformation. So deliberate, staged acts are very common among ritual abusers to confuse their victims. Another favorite one is alien abduction. So a lot of these cult groups stage an alien abduction, and they'll stage a surgery by an alien, and then they will make the victim believe that is what happened to them, and through torture and dissociation, they will bury the memories of the cult abuse more deeply, so that now the person sounds like, that they believe that their trauma is alien abduction. And for the victim, it works because now they have a basis for all of this fear that they have. They know that they're terrified. They know they have post-traumatic stress disorder. But now they think it's all from an alien abduction, but it was a staged alien abduction. So there's a lot of sources of disinformation within the victims. Mm-hmm. So it's confusing and hard work.
Well, that's a great point, and I want to go back to that because that was huge what you just said. Now, we know that you're not necessarily, and that's not what you set out to do, to be any kind of expert in cults. But I'm just going to run two things by you for quick answers because they've come from the listeners. Okay. An individual who listened to us just now talking about Indiana and what's going on in Indianapolis in particular, which is also a very interesting capital. But a listener just wanted to know if you ever heard out of Indiana, a cult called the Brotherhood?
No, I haven't, but that doesn't mean anything because
Sure.
I really have a relatively small sample of cases where I would register the details of the name of the group and the locations of the abuse because I tend not to believe accounts except from people whose credibility I've really closely evaluated. So I'm sorry I don't, but that doesn't mean it isn't something real. It's just that when you're dealing with the occult, you're always gathering secret information, and so kind of by the nature of the work, you end up not having a whole lot of data.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, again, this goes on all across America, so again, it would have to pop up.
I would recommend they check Stephen Hassan's website, freedomofmind.com, I think. Stephen Hassan, Hassan.
Okay.
He has a list of like 1,000 cults who have had, to one degree or another, some public front, and that would be someplace to look it up. It's all alphabetized.
All right, and I might have been. I don't know if I'm misconstrued why the listener wrote what he did, because he followed up with saying, "Oh, it's a real Christian sect." And I don't know if there's some kind of irony in there or what the deal is, but I'm sure we're going to hear more about that because something's not making sense here, and we'll get back to that. But going on to what another listener had asked of you, did you ever come across anything about strong satanic child abuse based in Victoria, Canada, on Vancouver Island? And something called, I guess...
There is I've heard a lot of reports of ritual abuse from that part of Canada. That seems to be another hot spot. It does. And
apparently there is something, I guess a saying that goes on with this that was some kind of hallmark of what was going on called the washed up feet.
Yes.
Yes.
That's something that's happening now where, yes, they're finding washed up feet, human. I guess there was one animal foot, but a lot of human feet. I mean, when I say a lot, I think it's like 3 or 4 recently in the news up there. But that does seem to be there. And I do have credible accounts from a number of people that do trace up to Vancouver of ritual abuse, not necessarily satanic. Some of it's witchcraft, black witchcraft, abusive witchcraft, human sacrifice, sex abusing witchcraft, not Wicca.
All right. Well, I appreciate that, Mark. That was key. Thanks for bringing that to our attention. I'm just looking through some of the other comments, let's see. Oh, all right. Here's another one. There was a mind control high-level trainer in Freemasonry using the nom de plume Savali in Escondido/San Diego. He's wondering if you ever had a patient that was related to that, and if you cannot speak to that, then can you at least tell us if you've ever come across that individual?
I know her.
You do?
I do know her. She never was my patient. And I know of cases, let's just put it this way, I have some corroboration I know she was a victim. I have corroboration for the fact that she was truly a victim of this. I can't get more specific than that. Now, I can't corroborate every detail of everything that she's alleged, but I can corroborate that I know she was definitely involved in a very abusive generational abuser group, cult satanic group. Yes.
And this is jogging my memory because I think I might have tried to get in touch with her. And you know what? I'm thinking back. Now I'm having these repressed memories, but I'm thinking back that I don't even know if you and I spoke about this a long time ago, but whether that's the case or not, I know that that this individual was giving interviews for a certain amount of time. By the time I got there, it wasn't happening anymore. That's what's now coming to the fore in my memory. And so, yeah, that does make a lot of sense. And thank you for sharing it. We have another question out of California. How often does Ellen come across victims who say they were formerly A, and this would come under, I think, the head of also of what we call Manchurian candidates or MKUltra victims, and that is, say, assassins, as Kathleen Sullivan has stated in her book Unshackled that she was, or perhaps prostitutes or couriers like Kathy O'Brien has stated in Transformation. Anything about that?
Yes, I have worked with people who I believe were programmed to have alter personalities, dissociated, not conscious to the host, to the apparently normal personality, the one who would be normally doing the day-to-day life. I have run into people who I believe had programmed personalities whose function it was to carry messages like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And so you know firsthand that that does exist, and it's a very real thing.
I definitely believe, and I, again, have some corroboration. When I say corroboration, I'm not talking just sitting there and going, oh, it sounds believable. I'm talking about actual corroboration. So,
right.
for instance, corroboration to me would be, let's say, somebody is able in their process of doing the work of getting free from this garbage, they can get from their unconscious mind one of the codes that was to remove a particular piece of programming. And let's say a few years later I run into somebody else who's got a very similar code, a program removal code, but that code is not on the internet. It's not, it's not like orange apples and green beans. It's a alphanumeric code of enough length that two people would not randomly come up with it. And I've got two people from different parts of the country giving me essentially the same code, maybe with a different tail or a different beginning, but it's got the same. The most of it is identical. That's corroboration, and I have that level of corroboration for the kind of programming that person's asking about, the being used as a courier within. We can generally refer to it as the MKUltra program, even though I don't specifically know if it was exactly part of that program. Because I don't know what fell under the rubric of MKUltra and what fell under Artichoke and what fell under,
right.
Monarch or, it's whatever.
Okay, and well spoken. Thank you very much. We have something else that I'll read to you. It says, it surprises me about the false syndrome. For the longest time, I had a hard time dealing with this, probably because of my own children. So I wonder how much of this is suppressed because of the false syndrome label, like they made it up to cover up for the nasty people that allow it. Like if you had a senator or someone of that nature to make it seem like the person who is being abused is at fault. How convenient. Would you want to comment about that?
Yeah, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation was created initially by people who were accused of abusing their children, and that organization coined the term, invented a quote-unquote syndrome, false memory syndrome. There is no such thing as false memory syndrome. The way they define it, it is not a medical or psychiatric syndrome. They're claiming that therapists ask improper questions, and that causes a person to believe they were abused when they weren't, and that's a syndrome. So the whole thing is very politically motivated. Now, people have analyzed the motives and the origins of the members of the advisory board for the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, and some very interesting dots end up being connected. Colin Ross has an article on the internet that connects the dots in a very logical, clear way. It's called Building the Manchurian Candidate. And he shows that this person on the advisory board actually had this motivation, and his motivation or her motivation is supported by, they're connected to this other person who worked for these people, and these people were connected to the grants that were part of the MKUltra project. And, you know, he builds a very, very strong case to show, to strongly suggest that that organization pulled together to suppress the information that was coming out about both ritual abuse, about the government projects like MKUltra, about dissociative identity being a true psychiatric disorder. It absolutely is. It used to be called multiple personality disorder. Now it's dissociative identity disorder. So that organization liked saying that, you know, therapists had made people believe that there is no such disorder, which is absurd. And even child abuse in general, trying to make it look like many, many accounts of child abuse are false memories implanted by therapists. So that organization, in my opinion, has been largely discredited professionally, because when they formed themselves, because most of them were not licensed clinicians and didn't have the ethical requirements that we have to not just, you know, talk flippantly, but we have to back what we say. But they did not have to do that, so they would make very broad brush, absurd statements, and they couldn't get complaints made against them to licensing boards or lawsuits or anything for the things that they said. And then the psychology and psychiatry communities had to start showing that the things that they were saying were not true. So in other words, just because a memory is recovered in therapy doesn't mean it's a false memory. In fact, there's a lot of evidence that recovered memories are true. And most people that do believe that they were abused and are talking about it in therapy had some memories before they came to the therapist, so it's not true that the therapist created those memories. So the research that disproved a lot of the outrageous claims of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, that took years to do. And now it's been done. And so now they really don't have a leg to stand on. And the False Memory Syndrome, you know, that entity, that diagnosis, whatever you want to call it, everybody knows, or all educated mental health professionals know that it's not a true thing. But it did a lot of damage. It affected the media, it affected the general public, and it affected survivors. So a lot of survivors of ritual abuse and a lot of people who have dissociative identity disorder, they started questioning their memories. Well, they don't like their memories. Their memories are horrifying. Their memories are distressing. Their memories give them post-traumatic stress disorder. So they started thinking, you know, well, maybe I did make this all up. Well, that has its advantages to believe they made it all up. So a lot of survivors started questioning their own memories and believing that they did have false memory syndrome, and it kind of set them back because unfortunately or fortunately, trauma does not disappear. It kind of keeps scratching on the back door. The pain inside of a person seeks expression, it seeks support, it wants somebody to have compassion, sympathy for what they went through. So all it does is delay the healing process. But I've communicated with many survivors who were very harmed by that. And then therapists who are not trauma experts, or not adequately educated in trauma, can have learned about this whole controversy in the newspaper instead of in their scientific journals. So they believe dissociative identity disorder is not real. So the person comes to their office and says, I hear these voices inside my head, and they diagnose them as schizophrenic. Or the person comes in and says, I remember, when I was 3 years old being sexually abused on an altar, and the therapist believes they're delusional because they learned about ritual abuse from the local newspaper. So the False Memory Syndrome Foundation did a lot of damage, but educated clinicians know that it's not a credible organization and it's not a true syndrome.
You just gave rise to a whole bunch of questions that I had, but first, our listeners, and from Andrew Colvin, who was on earlier, he asked, does Ellen know anything about functional analytic psychotherapy out of the University of Washington, where false memory was created?
Nope, I don't. Functional analytic psychotherapy. No, sorry.
That's okay. No, I mean, not a problem. I'm just looking through some of the other responses I've gotten because, like I said, I want to defer to those who are listening. I think I can go on if it's all right. I'm taking a look around to see. I got a couple of screens I'll look at, and I think it's safe for me to go through with this. So here's what, and also I just want to let folks know, again, we're talking to Dr. Ellen Lacter. Her website is endritualabuse.org, and she's with us from San Diego, California. You said two things, and this is very interesting. The first one you said minutes before, and that is, as a cover, ritual abusers, and I'm wondering if they would go through the whole, costume thing, embed in their victims, actually, to them, it's a true memory, but it's of a false situation, and that is, they were not abducted by aliens, but that is what they've been implanted with, and that's the cover that the abusers can hide behind. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, that's extremely
common among ritual abuse survivors.
Now, that is not to say, and I don't know, that is not to say, I would assume, that some folks who claim to have that happened would have necessarily been victims of this, or maybe I'm wrong. Do you believe it's a 100% deal? I doubt it would be, but what do you think about that those who claim they may have been abductees might have very well been, unwittingly, victims of abusers?
Yeah, I think some people who believe they were abductees are ritual abuse victims, but, as far as some people who believe they're abductees truly be abductees, that's sort of out of my area. I'm so busy trying to figure out ritual abuse. I don't spend time trying to figure out, the stuff about aliens. I'm very kind of myopic. I know what I know, and I don't know a lot about other things. But as a therapist, I don't ever discount anything. I don't feel like I have a right to say, that's not true. I would listen to the person and, just try to search for truth. Truth is always the goal.
All right. Well, and then again, you had talked about another false front, which would have been those who got behind the false memory syndrome. So here we have, in both cases, what would look like fronts for those who are the abusers. Would that be correct?
Look like fronts from the abusers?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what you're saying?
In other words, both of these would be fronts for the actual abusers.
Okay. I legally cannot say that every single person who's a member of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation is actually abuser motivated to create a front. But I would say that I would expect that to be true of many, if not most, of people in the False Memory Syndrome Foundation.
Okay, well, fair enough. But I had never thought about that, especially with the alien abduction element. And again, I'm not saying, I am not judging anyone, whoever from the time I get to the hills who say they have been abducted. But clearly this would be a good ruse to use, and I had never thought about that before. But boy, that would be a clever way to hide your tracks.
Absolutely.
I'm going to just throw this. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll finish up.
Well, I wanted to let people know. Okay, the website, the speech that I think people should look up if they're trying to figure out who were the members of the advisory board and the scientific advisory board of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, they should look up something called Building the Manchurian Candidate by Colin Ross, C-O-L-I-N, last name R-O-S-S, and it's on the internet at www.mindcontrolforums, forums.radio/CKLN01.htm. And he's got a speech that he gave at a conference in 1997 where he's really explaining these projects, these, MK Ultra, and all of the connections of that and many other things to the False Memory Syndrome Foundation members. Very interesting. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, not at all. That was fine.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. Boy, that name is ringing a bell for some reason, and I don't know if it's because we had on about 2 weeks ago a author who had dealt with the perfect assassin, and that had to do with his take on Lee Harvey Oswald as a victim of MK Ultra. And I'm just wondering if that came up. That rings a bell, and it's even though this brain is like very used and tired, it does hang on to something. So, at any rate, yeah, okay, we'll take a look at that without a doubt. And by the way, do you have a link to that site anywhere on yours?
Probably. I think I do. Yeah. Okay,
no problem. So folks can peruse that site if you're looking for that. And again, remember, it's endritualabuse.org, and it's Dr. Ellen Lacter. What I was wondering about across the years that you've worked with these victims, all right, do we deal with age groups? And if we do, is there a better recovery rate per those in certain age groups or cohorts?
In terms of how old they were when the abuse started? Or in terms of what age they are when they come to therapy?
Okay, that's a good question, and I'll refine it. Here's my assumption. It was my thinking, and it could be wrong. Or we'll just deal with this. That victims younger, because I think that would be the best time to try to obviously force oneself, because children are so malleable. I'm thinking that they're young, and if you get a chance to attend to them much sooner after the trauma, is there a better chance of recovery, or is that never the case? And as you treat them in 30s, not to say the abuse doesn't go on later, I'm just going to say for right now, those who might have been abused in their teens and younger, and you get to them, say, when it's just 3 years later or perhaps decades later, does the longer it go, is it the harder for them to recover and try to just, get it behind them and live somewhat of a normal life?
Okay. If they come to you because there's a parent or because child protection got them away from a situation, let's say that the abusers were sloppy, because most ritual abusers are not sloppy, but let's say they were sloppy and let's say sexual abuse was discovered by Child Protective Services, and let's say the child got put in a foster home, and let's say that the abusive parents were not allowed to have any contact. So now this child is actually safe, not being exposed to ongoing abuse. Or let's say that there's two parents and one of them is practicing ritual abuse unbeknownst to the other. So maybe the protective parent is being drugged, in their dinner and doesn't even know they've been drugged, and the kids are being ritually abused in the middle of the night, a few times a year. And then the protective parent discovers that the abuse was happening and gets the kids completely safe. And let's just say the family court does not force those children to still spend every other week with the abuser, which is hard to get them to do because it's so biased toward having children with both parents, and it needs so much evidence of really strong abuse before it fully protects children. But let's just say that the child for one of these ways, either foster home, adoptive home, or one protective parent and support of the family court so the child is truly safe, and that child goes into therapy and is truly safe, that child can be helped definitely as a little kid, and they can actually have their dissociative identity disorder not continue to develop, not coalesce into, fully formed personalities, but instead head the other direction of really kind of understanding everything that's happened to them, expressing it in play therapy or art therapy, expressing it directly finally when they feel safe enough, talking about what happened, etc. That kid can actually have a happy, okay life. Now, that's very rare. What the more typical course is that the abusers are not sloppy and they do enough torture to make the personality, create personalities that are hidden completely behind opaque amnestic barriers so that the host personality, the boy or girl who goes to school and, has friends during the day, has no idea that these other personalities are being ritually abused at 3 in the morning. That child typically will not even have memories of having been ritually abused until they're like 30 or 35 years old. And I think that it tends to wait that long. And I don't really think anybody has an answer as to why it waits that long, but I think it requires that level of maturity, that level of age to be able to handle the enormity of the horror of what happened. So I don't know that the 20-year-old who is trying to master all of the challenges of first becoming an adult, becoming an independent person in the world, working and relationships and all of that. I don't know if that person has the enough psychological reserves to handle discovering this level of horror. So the person tends to remember it in their 30s or in their 40s. That's the normal course. Now, if somebody does remember it in their 20s, it can go either way. Some people can tough it out and get through this and handle it without falling apart. And other people, I just think it's too much for them. That in some cases, maybe it might actually be even better to wait. But there's a horrible downside to that because very often the person is still being abused while they're waiting. But if they don't wait and they start processing it, they can actually end up in serious psychological crisis, in psychiatric hospitals and feel psychotic and, et cetera. So it's a very hard, this is a hard uphill battle these people have to fight. I really admire these people because, I'm such a wuss personally. If I had, what one ritual, let's say they've got, 300 rituals in their life or 500 rituals, one of those rituals I fear would put me in extreme terror and depression, for my whole life. And yet they've had hundreds. Now, because they had hundreds and because it started so young, they did form personalities. And those personalities share the burden, and that actually does help them psychologically survive this. So they have that resource that really does make it easier for them to live with this having happened to them. And people who were not tortured as little children don't have the capacity to create personality. So when something horrible happens to us, it's right there in our face. We're feeling it, we're knowing it, and we're horribly affected by it all the time. But I'm not trying to minimize what they go through either, because I'd rather have that than be tortured in 500 rituals. By the way, the Colin Ross thing, I just looked it up, and he does talk about the Oswald case and the connections of that to the Manchurian Candidate and all of that. So you probably are remembering, right?
I appreciate that. I mean, that's kind of relatively fresh still, but, it's one of those things where all of a sudden that name was like, boing. Okay, all right.
Can I tell you about the book that just came out?
Oh, man. Oh, I said I was going to do that without a doubt. We got 6 minutes, and let's run with the book, because that is a very powerful book, no doubt about it.
I need 30 seconds. Okay, we got a brand new book. A lot of the experts in this field have gotten together, and we've all written a chapter, and it just came out a month ago, and it's called Ritual Abuse in the 21st Century. And it's on the website of the publisher, which is www.rdr, that's Robert Reed, so it's rdrpublishers.com. It's under recent titles, and it's called Ritual Abuse in the 21st Century. I have a chapter in there about differential diagnosis of schizophrenia versus ritual abuse, mind control, traumatic stress, and a lot of experts in the field have chapters. A couple of survivors have very powerful chapters in here. And there's also another book that just came out on ritual abuse, and it's called Forensic Aspects of Dissociative Identity Disorder, and that's coming out of the United Kingdom, and that's published by Karnak, K-A-R-N-A-C, and it's focusing a lot on ritual abuse and mind control. Another great book. So, 2008 has been a year where the people who are doing this work are feeling really excited by the progress we've made. It's kind of like the False Memory Syndrome Foundation shut everybody up for a bunch of years, and now we've kind of really become more powerful and more rooted. We have substance that we can cite and research, and so, just really want to, let people know, keep your hope up. It's going to be, we're on a roll here. Great things are happening.
And I apologize because I got sidetracked, but one of the things I thought was impressive, and here's what I want to ask you also, for those who might want to take a look at the contents of that book, is there any way they can, as you gave me, a chance to look at the table of contents, to the chapters and the authors, and to what particular subjects they write?
Yeah, the entire table of contents is on that rdrpublishers.com website. If you go to recent titles and you scroll down about 10 books, you'll see the book. You click on the link, and all of the chapters are there. The authors and their credentials are listed, and the emails. The emails of almost all of the authors are listed there too. So, we're we're all of the people who wrote, are very dedicated to this, and, allowing their emails to be out there and people can write them. I mean, we've got to make people hear what's going on.
And I want the listeners to know that I'm not, pulling off this, sleazy sales thing. But when I was slow to look at the table of contents as we went back and forth with emails. And I think you kind of realized it did one of these whiplash knee jerks, whoa. And I came back and I said, this is, as far as I'm concerned, this is it looks like to me, a very comprehensive book. If not, and I'll ask you this, do you think it's one of a kind right now in your field?
Oh, it's definitely the book. This is the book right now. There are wonderful autobiographical books by survivors. There are some books from 10 years ago by professionals, but this is the, state-of-the-art, cutting-edge stuff. And by the way, as far as, financially, none of the authors have been paid. We were not paid. This is still a controversial area. The publisher, I don't know if they're going to make any money or if they're going to break even or if they're going to make a couple $1,000 bucks. The editors, I doubt, are going to make anything. And if you consider the thousands of hours that they put in, trying to pull this together, I mean, if they end up with $10 an hour for that, I would be shocked. This is nobody's going to make money on this because not enough people believe this is real. Not enough people are going to buy this. Not enough graduate psychology programs are talking about ritual abuse. The False Memory Syndrome Foundation did a lot of damage, and it's going to take years and years for the truth. The truth is like the tortoise, and the False Memory Syndrome Foundation is like the hare. Mm-hmm. And, the tortoise, I feel like we're kind of ahead, but people still think the hair's ahead. But the truth will win. It's just that sometimes it's slow.
Is there a desire, or was this book necessarily targeted? I'm not sure. To find its way into academic libraries.
Boy, I don't know. It's so brand new.
Not necessarily, right?
Everybody, ask your library to buy it.
Okay, you got to go where others.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Steve.
and believe me, again, Ellen Lacter and ritualabuse.org. Doc, thanks very much for coming on. The hour flew by. I don't know what it was like for you, but I couldn't believe when I looked it was 53 minutes after. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Yes. Thank you, Steve.
All right, good night and
Bye-bye.
God bless. Thank you, Doc.
Bye-bye.